The moment my adopted son called me Mom at Thanksgiving, my dad completely lost it. He said I didn't earn the right to be called that since I hadn't actually given birth. It was just another one of those fake, happy Sunday dinners, like a Hallmark movie, but with the sound turned off. The real sounds were the judging, the pressure, and that silent parental disapproval that stings way worse than any yelling ever could. The dining room was set up the same way it had been since I was a kid. Mom's roast chicken, Dad's mashed potatoes drowning in butter. My grandma gave me a hideous crocheted table runner for Christmas when I was 16, and somehow it never disappeared. My sister Phoebe was practically radiating before she even spoke, wearing a soft lilac sweater that made her look like she'd just come from a maternity photo shoot. She kept nervously touching her stomach like her barely there baby bump needed protection from the world. Then she announced it, her voice shaking a little, and her husband, Nate, squeezed her hand under the table. She said they were expecting, just like that. No build-up, no drama, no dessert course, just 3 words that just blew up the entire room. We're having a baby. My mother literally screamed, and then she started bawling, the way women sometimes do when every emotion they have just has to come out. Dad got up, went over to Phoebe, and gave her this super rare, super heartfelt hug. You know, the kind that makes you think, wow, is he ever this tender? Then the words hit me, the ones that totally floored me and still kind of echo in my head like a bad memory. Dad pulled back, turned to Mom, and said, now this is real success. He didn't mean anything awful by it, I don't think. I picture him saying it like he was calling a touchdown, like a coach cheering on his team. But the second he said it, it felt like my chest caved in, like something deep inside me just shattered. Still, I smiled. I smiled because I'm really good at faking it. I smiled because I've sat in those sterile doctor's offices, wearing those flimsy paper gowns while some stranger with a clipboard tells you your eggs are old, your uterus is tricky, or that your body just isn't cooperating. I smiled because the last time I lost it in front of them, Mom gave me herbal tea and told me to chill out. Maybe it's all in your head. I smiled because I had to, because what else was I supposed to do? Throw my plate and scream about the hormone shots, the surgeries, the miscarriages they knew nothing about. Tell them I was once 12 weeks pregnant and lost the baby in a Walgreens bathroom while no one picked up the phone? I smiled. I watched them all fawning over her, clinking glasses, and I even chimed in, telling Phoebe how happy I was for her. And I kind of meant it. She didn't ask for all this attention. She didn't build the platform they were all worshiping her on. Maybe she just wanted to escape it all to be seen as like a regular person. But the bitterness was still there, burning inside. That didn't change the reality. I was 38, couldn't have kids, and my folks thought I was a complete disappointment. You know what stings the worst? They knew. They knew everything I'd been through. They sat in the waiting room at the hospital after my ectopic pregnancy almost killed me after I came home from my 3rd failed IVF. They brought over those casserole dishes, and I was sobbing so hard I couldn't even eat. They saw me blow 5 years of savings on this dream that just wasn't going to happen. They saw it all. And now Phoebe was pregnant. Suddenly, none of that seemed to matter. Phoebe, who always said she didn't want kids until she was at least 40. Phoebe, who got pregnant 6 months after her wedding without even trying. Her life felt perfectly planned, like some kind of elaborate performance. After dinner, I stayed behind to help clean up while everyone crowded around Phoebe in the living room, rubbing her belly like it held some kind of magical secret. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, the water running forever while I dodged the baby name game, those discussions that felt more like boardroom meetings than conversations about future children. When I finally got in my car that night, the cold air just about took my breath away. I started the engine, stared out into the dark, and whispered to myself, something I hadn't voiced in ages, they think I'll never be a mom. My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles were ghostly white. They were so wrong. My eyes focused, and a small fire flickered inside of me. It was low, ugly, and scary. Flat out wrong. There's this quiet that comes when you stop fighting the same battle over and over. It's not peaceful, not a relief, but a lasting pain, like your body recalls the fight even when it's over. After the last IVF failed, I didn't scream or cry or break anything. I just sat on the edge of the bed, watching a single red spot on the sheets, and knew it was done. Not because the doctors said so, not because I couldn't fund another round. But something deep down, a voice I'd forgotten I even had, whispered, enough. For months after that, I drifted, showing up to work, answering texts, faking laughs at baby showers, all the while feeling empty inside like some kind of haunted jack-o'-lantern. On Halloween, I deleted all the fertility apps. I boxed up all the baby clothes I'd bought on a whim. Someone gave me a tiny, crocheted hat just in case. The sonogram picture stayed tucked away in the back of my nightstand. Then I tossed the box into the attic, shut the door, and tried to tell myself it was over. But you know, just because you're done doesn't mean you're done. The sadness stuck around, and it was weird. I'd burst into tears during dog food commercials and steer clear of the baby aisle at the store, like it was a danger zone. Then one night, around 3 in the morning, I was on my phone, looking up volunteer stuff in the city. I didn't even know what I was looking for, really. Maybe something to take my mind off things. Maybe a reason to get out of bed. Maybe a lifeline. What I found was a program for mentoring kids at a shelter nearby. They called it Haven House, and it wasn't much to look at. The paint was peeling, the lights in the hallway flickered, and the couches in the rec room looked ancient. But there was a real warmth there, a tired, genuine warmth that didn't need much beyond showing up and caring. So I signed up. For the first few weeks, the kids didn't know what to do with me. I didn't blame them. I was just another grown-up, smiling and probably not sticking around. But I kept showing up week after week. I played games, read books, helped with homework, and tried not to completely fall apart in the parking lot afterward. Man, by the time they were 8, those kids had seen things that would haunt most people their whole lives. They didn't need me to fix anything, you know? Just someone who stuck around. That's how I met Jamal. He was 10, and I first noticed him always sitting in the corner of the rec room, hoodie up, notebook on his lap. He wasn't much of a talker, but his eyes, they missed nothing. And when he did speak, it was always sharp, surprising, like he was saving up his words, carefully choosing what to say. After a couple of weeks, he started calling me Ms. K, such a sweet name. It always gave me this little pang in my chest. He acted tough, like he didn't need anyone. But you could see it, the way he needed someone to ask why he never smiled in pictures, someone to notice when he went quiet for too long. Later, I found out his mom had overdosed 2 years earlier, and his dad. He'd just disappeared, moved to another state, started a new life. Most people couldn't even imagine how utterly alone that kid was, and maybe that's why we clicked, because I was lonely too. I started going to the shelter way more often. For over 3 years, I was there practically every day. That's like 400 days a year. I'd bring snacks, games, books, the works. I taught him how to make scrambled eggs without burning them, how to sew a button back on his shirt. We built these whole worlds out of cardboard, flew paper airplanes, and finally got into a rhythm. Some days he'd sit next to me and just be quiet, and that was fine. Other days he'd chat my ear off, sharing stories about kids at school and a dream where we lived in a house with a red front door and a dog named Clutch. He used to call me Ms. K, but sometimes he'd slip and say Mom. He'd always catch himself right away. But each time he did, it was like something really profound settled inside me, a truth that neither of us was quite ready to say out loud. I never brought it up, never made it weird. I just let it hang there, quiet and warm, like a tiny seed waiting to sprout. Then one Thursday, it had been a brutal week, one of those times when work was a nightmare. My car battery died, and my sister texted me, bragging about her baby taking its first steps. I got to the shelter totally worn out. I didn't even try to pretend. I just fell onto the couch next to Jamal, closed my eyes, and let out a huge sigh like my spirit was leaking out. He didn't say anything for a bit. Then he said, so quietly I almost didn't hear it, "Are you okay?" I nodded, too wiped out to lie, and said, "Just a rough day." Jamal was silent again for a few seconds. Then he looked up at me, his voice barely above a breath, and said something that completely shattered me. "Can I be with you forever?" And suddenly everything I thought I knew about how my life was supposed to go just shifted. Because I wasn't done, not even close. I was just starting something I never saw coming. There's a kind of grit that doesn't announce itself with loud noises or a tight grip, but instead it slowly settles into you like a second spine made of pure determination. That was the kind of strength I desperately needed. Starting the adoption process for Jamal was a tough, degrading, slow-motion ordeal, a system that seemed determined to make me feel inadequate at every turn. Not married, not rich, not young, and definitely not the perfect candidate. Just a woman with a broken heart, a stable job, and a son whose eyes were already calling me home. Even before the paperwork was approved, the first meeting with Child Protective Services felt more like an inquisition than a review. The caseworker sat in my overly tidy living room, clicking her pen every few seconds like a rhythm to soothe my growing anxiety. She asked how I disciplined Jamal, what I'd do if he got in trouble at school, what training I had about trauma, and how I'd handle his acting out. I wanted to yell. Love is the answer to every single question. But I just nodded, handed her the documents, and tried not to shake as she checked out my bookshelf as if it held all my deepest secrets. Each step was a new hurdle: background checks, home visits, court filings, psychological evaluations, and parenting classes. I leaped over all those hurdles, really hurting myself emotionally on a few of them. I kept my mouth shut when screaming would have felt so much better. I never told Mom and Dad what I was going through. My sister, too, no way. I knew exactly how they'd react, and I just couldn't handle it. They were so stuck on the idea of family being all about blood and guts, like having a womb was the only way to be truly family. I couldn't face their pitying looks, their helpful but condescending advice, or the worst part, their judgment disguised as concern. The whole time, their world revolved around Phoebe's baby bump. That group chat was flooded with ultrasound pictures, stroller recommendations, endless baby name polls, and links to Pinterest boards filled with pastel everything. Mom even started signing her texts, "Love, Grandma to be," like this pregnancy was totally changing who she was. It felt like watching a movie where you're not even in the cast, just some extra standing in the background while the credits roll without your name. And then came the baby shower. My sister's best friend threw this fancy pants thing at some upscale place. The invites were all gold-trimmed, and the gift registry had a $500 diaper pail on it. I got my invite late, like they totally forgot about me, and I almost didn't go. But something inside, maybe spite, maybe stubbornness, maybe just needing to feel like I mattered, made me show up. I showed up late on purpose, sauntering in once the party was already going, after the games had started and the drinks were flowing. I had my purse with me, gripping it tight. Inside, the adoption papers were tucked in, all folded up neat, alongside a card and a $20 baby blanket I'd grabbed at the store at the very last second. No one even noticed me right away. My mom was holding court by the mimosa station, just cackling away, never letting her hand leave Phoebe's big all-pregnant belly like it was some precious artifact. Dad was off to the side, nodding along to some guy's boring story about car seats and how to get a baby to sleep. Not even my sister looked up when I came in. She was totally occupied, ripping open a pile of pink-wrapped presents and flashing that perfect picture-ready smile, the kind that makes everything feel fake. I stayed back, pretending to check out the decorations. Everything was white and gold with these soft pink touches, like they were gonna raise this kid with an Instagram filter or something. Over by the cake table, there was a heart-shaped balloon arch, and the main event was right there, displayed like a wedding showpiece. It was a three-tiered beauty with fondant flowers and fancy pearls, and it said, "Finally, a true mother in the family." Those words, though, they hit me like a punch to the gut. I have no clue who wrote them, or if they were even aimed at me, or maybe they just weren't thinking. But damn, they stung. I just stood there staring at the cake while everyone else's laughter swirled around me like I was in some weird dream. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against that official letter, and the memories just flooded back. I used to lie awake at night, worrying if I could keep Jamal. I recalled the first time he had a bad dream and he snuck into my bed whispering, "Don't go, all right?" I thought about how many people treat kids like they're just something to show off, like they're some kind of status symbol. But he wasn't any of those things. He was my son. Not because we shared blood, but because we picked each other, even when the world tried to convince us we weren't deserving of love. I got closer to the cake, close enough that nobody else could hear, and I let the words come out real slow and steady, like a promise etched in stone. "We'll see about that. Driving back to your childhood home during the holidays, it brings up all the stuff you thought you'd buried under years of therapy, putting distance between you and them, and just trying to forget. The trees, the cracked sidewalks, the porch light Dad still hasn't fixed since last winter. It all comes back to you, like a tidal wave of stuff you didn't want to feel again. And there I was, gripping the steering wheel maybe a little too hard, checking the rearview mirror every few minutes at Jamal, who was in the back like a collection of nervous energy, all bundled up in a clip-on tie, and one of those sweaters that make a little boy look like a mini professor. He'd been silent the whole trip, his eyes bouncing between the windows and his hands folded in his lap, like he was getting ready for a test nobody had prepared for. I didn't blame him, honestly. It was his first time meeting them, not just my parents, but the whole shebang. My sister, her husband, their kid, all the cousins, and that whole casserole and judgment crew. I tried to prep him, saying it might be a bit much, they might not get it right away. But he just nodded and mumbled, "I got you, Ms. K," that stung way more than it should have, especially since he hadn't even called me in weeks. We'd finalized the adoption 2 months before legally, officially, he was mine. But I hadn't told my family, not a word, not on the phone, not even a text. Maybe I was chicken. Maybe I was just protecting myself. Maybe some deep down part of me still thought they'd find a way to mess it all up, to tear it down, to take away what it meant to me. But there he was, sitting in the backseat, swinging his little legs and holding a handmade card that said Happy Thanksgiving in pencil. A turkey with sunglasses was his artistic masterpiece. I parked the car, took a deep breath, and looked at him. Ready? I asked, trying to sound calm even though my stomach was doing flips. He gave me a half smile, more tough than happy, and just said, "Yeah, I guess." Then he got out, his shoes crunching on the gravel like the first, uncertain notes of some crazy song I had no clue how to play. The house smelled like sage, cinnamon, and a whole lot of pressure. The place was buzzing, everyone talking over each other in the living room, the TV blaring some football game nobody was paying attention to. My sister, naturally, was right in the thick of it, baby perched on her hip, looking like she was ready to film a cooking show instead of just feeding the family. Mom and Dad were hovering around her like she was some kind of magnet, completely absorbed by the squirming little newborn. Nobody even saw us come in at first. I just stood there in the doorway, Jamal right beside me, his hand gripping mine extra tight. He didn't say a word, just looked up at me with these big, uncertain eyes like he was waiting for some kind of cue. So I gave him one. I squeezed his hand back, smiled at him, and stepped inside. Mom was the first to spot us. She turned around, blinked like she'd seen a ghost, and then plastered on this huge, fake smile. "Oh, you're here, sweetie," she chirped, her voice all high-pitched and automatic, her eyes flicking over to Jamal for a second before snapping back to the baby like she couldn't risk looking away for too long. I just introduced him casually like he was any other friend. "This is Jamal, he's with me now." That's all I said. No big announcement, no explanations, just the plain truth, spoken softly, like it was a question everyone was too afraid to ask. Jamal didn't say anything either. He stayed close, quiet and polite, probably trying his best not to step out of line. He helped haul in the pie and set out the napkins, flashing a goofy grin while my aunt tousled his hair, kinda like he was some strange animal she didn't know how to handle. No one ever really asked about him, didn't question why he was even around. People just took him in like they took in the rain, quietly, without a peep, and without even flinching when he got too close. Dinner was all small talk and fake smiles. You know, the kind of conversation that barely scratches the surface. Phoebe's kid was treated like a little prince, getting all the kisses, cooing, and praise like he was sent by some god to justify everything my parents had ever done. I watched them light up whenever he drooled, tooted, or sneezed, while I sat there in silence, chopping up the turkey for Jamal, making sure he had enough gravy and letting my quiet speak volumes. And then something happened. Midway through dinner, as we were passing around the mashed potatoes, Jamal looked up from his plate. His voice was soft, but still loud enough to cut through all the meaningless chatter around the table. "Mom," he asked, "can you pass the mashed potatoes?" The whole room just froze. Forks were stuck in mid-air, glasses paused mid-sip. People stopped talking mid-sentence. The silence was so thick, I figured it could crack the walls. Jamal didn't seem to notice. Or maybe he did and just pretended not to. He just kept staring at me, waiting for the potatoes like nothing weird was going on at all. I gave them to him without even a second thought, smiled nice and easy, and said, "Sure, honey." My dad's voice cracked, like the words were a hard thing for him to get out, his face flushing with confusion and a real anger that was scary to see. "What did he just say to you?" He asked, his tone sharp and quiet, like he already knew what was coming but hated it. And I looked right back at him, feeling calm for the first time in ages, and I thought, here we go. There's this kind of silence that happens when the truth hits, like a rock in a quiet little pond, and it doesn't really explode instead. It just spreads out, making everyone uneasy, staring at the floor and shutting down any happiness. That's exactly what it felt like. After my dad asked, after Jamal called me Mom, the act we'd been doing as a family just fell apart with that one honest sentence. The weirdest part was how normal it felt, like we'd been waiting for this our whole lives, like the awkwardness was just waiting for the right moment to blow up. I didn't blink. I didn't stumble over my words. I looked at the man who'd kissed my boo-boos, fixed my bike, and taught me to drive, and I told him plainly, he's my son. The whole room went nuts, and in like 3 seconds, my sister snorted like someone had spilled wine all over her rug. Seriously. "It couldn't just be my day, could it?" she yelled, practically throwing her fork down. The plate wobbled. "You had to do this now? Adopt a kid and think that makes you a mom." I didn't say anything right away. Mom's face went from confused to heartbroken in a flash. Her lips trembled like she'd been rehearsing some big speech in the mirror for years. She blinked a million times before barely whispering, You adopted him. You didn't even tell us." 6 months ago," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It was finalized in August." The whole room went blurry, a crazy mix of shouting, clanging forks, and somebody knocking over a chair. Jamal squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes wide, watching everything. I wanted to scoop him up and get us out of there, somewhere safe and quiet. But I didn't move. I just stayed put, letting the whole thing blow up, letting them show me their true colors when they lost control. My dad slowly stood up like he was about to pass judgment and looked at me with this disgust that felt like poison in my mouth. "That's not the same," he said. "You didn't give birth, you didn't make him." He shook his head, and that was it. That was the breaking point. I stood up, raised my glass not for a toast, but as a weapon, and let every word out slow and sharp like a knife slicing through years of silence. "So what is a real mom, huh? Is it all about blood? Is it a fancy hospital bracelet and a baby picture stuck in a scrapbook you never even look at anymore? Or is it showing up for court, dealing with therapists, and those nights when your 10-year-old wakes up screaming, nightmares he can't even explain? Is love something you get because it's in your genes, or is it something you gotta earn?" My mom used to whisper my name like a warning, but I wouldn't back down, not after keeping my mouth shut for all those years. "Let's talk about success," I said, looking right at them. "How do you define it? Is it the daughter who gave you a grandchild to show off on Facebook, the one who did everything right, even when she didn't want to? Or is it the daughter who built a life from scratch after everything fell apart, the one who never gave up on a kid nobody else cared about?" Phoebe mumbled, "Jesus, you're really doing this?" and practically jumped out of her chair like she was about to run. But I wasn't done. I set down my drink and finally let it out, this thing I'd been carrying around like a rock in my gut for years. "I was pregnant once," I said, real calm, like it was nothing. "You just never noticed. You were too busy gushing over someone else's baby bump." The room went completely silent. I didn't say another word, no details, no explanations, nothing to make it all better. They didn't deserve that. Let them sit with it. Let them feel it just for a little while, the not knowing, the questions that hang in the air with no answers. Jamal looked up at me, his little hand still holding mine, and everything changed. Not forgiveness, not even a feeling of good job, just this calm feeling of finally having my story back. I bent down a little, looked at him, and whispered, "Ready to go, buddy?" He gave me a nod, squeezed my hand, and we walked right past the shocked faces, past the unspoken judging eyes and the broken promises, past the cold turkey and the half-eaten pie. We just kept going right out the front door without a backward glance. When we got to the porch, he stopped, tugged on my shirt, and mumbled, "Mom." "Yeah," I said back, "Mom," knowing I'd never get tired of hearing it. He didn't say anything else, just hugged me tight, face buried in my stomach. In that moment, it didn't matter how many of them didn't get it. It didn't matter who disagreed or kept holding on to their own little worlds, because some wounds you can't see, some families aren't just about blood, and sometimes revenge is as simple as hearing the word "mom" when you need it most. And behind that closed door, my father finally looked down at his feet.